Let me just quickly talk about what we're trying to do in Goa and give it a little bit of a context of how we're trying to implement it politically. We'll talk also about the concept again in a couple of days. So this really, I come from Goa Foundation. I'm a volunteer there. And Goa Foundation is an environmental nonprofit working since 1986. Iron ore mining is our single biggest environmental problem, and Goa Foundation has been fighting this since 1992. I've joined with Goa Foundation in about 2011, and I've come at this whole problem of mining really from a corruption standpoint and the way it's distorting the entire politics, governance, democracy in the state of Goa. And as we'll discuss, as you'll see, these kinds of problems are there across the country. So what is the political problem in mining in Goa? Just at a very rough level, mining started in the 1950s when the Portuguese were still in control. There were 800 mining leases in a really small territory, and these were perpetual leases. So the guys who got these mining leases over a period of time felt that they actually owned the mineral, which they don't. Now, the terms of the lease were such, and we'll see this a little bit later, that a lot of money was being thrown out and the mining companies became very rich. And from even as early as 1961, when Goa was liberated, the mining companies were basically, or the miners were basically in control of the entire political system because they were the ones with the money. So they decided, our first chief minister, in fact, was a miner. He was a mine owner. Also, interestingly, for the Indians here, he was probably the first OBC chief minister in the country and actually did a lot of progressive things like land reforms, primary education, primary health care. But he was also a mine owner. And this whole system of mining controlling the politics of Goa has been on for the last 60 years. Now, iron ore mining has gone through ups and downs like most commodities. There are times it's superbly profitable, and there are times when you just don't make any money because there's no demand. So what happens when the prices come down in iron ore mining is that the miners basically try to figure out how can we break the rules so that we can reduce our cost and still break even and being able to do something. So a simple example is that most of the trucks in Goa are allowed to transport 10 tons. So when prices are low, you can't make money. What they do is they add a little sideboard illegally to it and put 12 tons on it. So, the cost of transportation goes down. The politicians are happy to allow it because, otherwise if mining stops, then there's an employment problem and there's a whole bunch of other political consequences they don't like. So they let it take place. Soon enough, prices go back up, but the sideboards remain because now that's become the accepted practice. There's an accepted way of bribing the politicians, the policemen who are supposed to check this, and the whole system is now in this corruption mode. Then what happened over time was that because of the way mining was being done, because these guys felt they were in charge of the whole economy, is that they started breaking all the laws, including the environment laws, and creating a lot of human rights damage. And the people in the mining area started protesting. So what did the miners do? What any of us would do actually in the same position. They went to the leaders, the local leaders in those mining areas and said, why don't you buy a truck? And we can run a truck at 3 rupees a ton kilometer. We'll give you 11 rupees a ton kilometer. Basically, 8 is the implicit bribe. So they co-opted all the local leaders, or many of the local leaders, into owning trucks and becoming part of the system. So you had now, and the entire anti-mining, sort of the pro-environment, pro-human rights movement got split. Now let's look at, so in Goa, mining, while it's a small state, mining dependent, people who own trucks, people who have jobs, are maybe 10% of the population. The people who don't want mining because the truck is in their face or their bleeding heart environmentalists are probably another 10%. Most of the people are living in the cities or along the beaches and saying, what's the problem with mining? It's happening. It's not so good, but it's creating a lot of jobs and it's getting foreign exchange for the country and it's getting government revenue. So, let's do mining and, maybe we have to try and figure out how to improve things. So this is where Goa Foundation in 2012 got into some litigation at the Supreme Court where there was a commission which found lots of illegalities, and we asked the Supreme Court to do a permanent ban on mining. The Goa government in turn came back and said, no, please don't do that. 20% of the population is dependent on mining. And we'll have a law and order problem and the Supreme Court will be to blame. Supreme Court did not want to be blamed. So they picked up an issue of something called intergenerational equity and said that, we've said this is part of our fundamental rights and we want to implement intergenerational equity. And how do we do that? Now, I'm not going to go into intergenerational equity. If you were here yesterday, you could have heard the talk at Nalsar. But we came up as a result of that with a very crisp, concise idea. And I'll take you through how we're trying to communicate this in India and in Goa. And this will be the rest of, this is where the basic income component comes. So we have 5 principles for mining, for what we're calling fair mining. The first principle is the state owns natural resources, including minerals, as the trustee on behalf of the people and especially future generations. The state owns minerals as a trustee for the people and future generations. This is constitutional in India and actually most parts of the world. The second principle, as we have inherited the minerals, nobody out here has created minerals, as we have inherited the minerals, our obligation is to make sure our children inherit either the minerals or its full value. Okay, this is intergenerational equity actually. This is also constitutional in India. To take a quick example now of intergenerational equity in practice, and this I'm going to use an Indian example, but so suppose you inherit, let's say, a gold bangle. In India, everybody understands that if you've inherited the gold bangle, you don't have a right over it. You can wear the gold bangle and feel that you're looking good, but you must make sure that your next generation, whether it's your daughter-in-law, if you don't have children, then your nephews and nieces inherit the gold bangle. You do not have a right to break it up and finish it off. So now you have this gold bangle. You have 2 choices. One is you can, put it into the ground or keep it in a safe deposit locker in the bank. It gives you no income, but it's a cost. So you might decide that, let me sell the gold bangle and buy a small piece of land. You've seen the kinds of pieces of land. As long as I keep the land properly, I get an income, my child inherits the land, and they can get the income and it can go down through generations. So this is the broad concept of intergenerational equity that we're promoting. So principle 3 is this. If we decide to sell our minerals, we must ensure zero loss mining. Every single bit of value we must get. And in this case, the state of Goa, as the legal owner under a constitution, has to get the full value of the minerals other than extraction costs and a profit for the extractor. Principle 4 is, whatever we receive from the sale of our minerals, we must save for our future generations. Now, we can't buy that much land because the minerals are very valuable. There isn't enough land to buy. So we basically are suggesting what many countries do, Norway being the great example, create a big mutual fund or an endowment fund for the people. And again, as long as you keep the real value of that fund intact, so you keep reinvesting up to inflation, you protect it against theft, you've done your duty by future generations. Instead of getting the mineral, they're going to get the fund. Principle 5, we own the minerals. We own the fund because the fund has been created from the minerals. So we own the income from the fund beyond inflation, the real income of the fund. So we are saying that simply distribute that equally to everybody in the state of Goa as owners. It's a right of ownership. It's a citizen's dividend. It's a universal basic income. These are our 5 principles of fair mining. Each one of these are, in our mind, constitutional in the country and most likely constitutional everywhere. And if you think about it, it hits on many of the sort of moral values we consider dear. Of course, it's fair from many aspects. Mining continues. The miner gets a reasonable profit. The truck owners and the mining dependent get employment. But the real value of the mineral goes to the people who own the minerals, which is us and the future generations, and we share the value. So it's fairness. It also, if you think about it a little bit deeper, it embodies justice, equality, liberty, fraternity, and many other things. But one important part is it is within a generation equality and not equity. And I want to make this point, and there is a political reason to it that I'll come to a little bit later. Also, now why do we suggest this particular structure? It's an ownership structure, yes, but we are actually trying to solve a different problem. We're trying to solve the resource curse problem. So what is the aim of this? So the aim of the dividend, okay, how many of you, let me ask, show of hands, how many of you own minerals? Please raise your hand if you own minerals. I see one hand there, one hand there. Anybody on stage? There's somebody who's raising that. Okay, only 2 people own minerals. I also own 3, 4. Actually, most likely, every single person in this room owns minerals. Most likely. In India, offshore minerals are owned by the national government as a trustee on behalf of us. Everybody who's Indian owns minerals. In most geographies, including the US, in the US it's a little exceptional, but in most countries the state owns minerals on behalf of the people, so most of you are owners of minerals. Even in the US, the land ownership, the mineral ownership goes with the land. Offshore minerals, like in the Gulf of Mexico, belongs to the national federal government. So if you're from the US, you have a right in that mineral. Plus, about 30% of the land in the US belongs to either the federal government or the state governments. So almost everybody here owns minerals, but you don't even know it. Why? So the purpose of the dividend is to connect the person to the mineral, and it's not enough to create a feeling of ownership, but we have to do a lot of other things to inculcate that feeling of ownership. Now, if you have that feeling of ownership, what does the rest of the structure do? Zero loss mining is very powerful. And here's what we found when we analyzed what was happening in Goa. We took our single largest mining company and we did a thought experiment. We own the minerals, so we could ask them to be a contractor for us. Whatever they sold the mineral for, we could have sold the mineral for the same value. But they would have said that we need to be compensated for all our expenses, plus we need to earn a profit. They're in business fairly. So we we looked at all the expenses as per their annual audited financial statements. We looked at the capital they deployed in the iron ore mining business, and we gave them a 20% after-tax return on assets. Again, somebody who's familiar with India will know that's an exceptionally high rate of return. And we did that deliberately because if we put it at the correct level of 10 to 12%, the India said not 12%, 13%, your calculations are wrong. But if they argue with 20%, it's obvious that, it's obviously stupid. So we found that for every 177 rupees of iron ore we exported, the cost of extraction was 170, the cost of extraction was 60, and this reasonable profit was 10. So the minerals were worth 100 rupees to the state of Goa. I've just normalized the values to get to 100. Now, how much, as the owner of these minerals, how much does the state of Goa get? Less than 5. So we are selling something worth 100 for 5 to the mining companies. The mining companies are, yay, bonanza. Let's extract everything and disappear before these guys figure out what's going on. Environment be damned, human rights be damned. We'll just buy out all the politicians and bureaucrats and disappear. So the zero loss and the citizens' dividend is supposed to make everybody in the state of Goa basically overseeing these mining guys and completely changing the incentive structure. Because instead of getting something worth 100 for 5, now they're getting for 100, and everybody's going to be sitting and watching them. Now let's look at the political incentive. Mr. Rai is going to speak after me, but a big incentive for extraction, one is of course the upfront corruption, but second is now that even that 5 rupees that comes can be spent by the politician. But what we've said is, this is not your property. You have to get 100, and you have to put it into a future generations fund. Doesn't go to the budget, you don't get to spend it. And when there's income that goes directly to the people, that also you can't spend. Now, if you want to build a bridge or a statue for whoever you like, you raise a tax on us, you come to us, convince us to pay the tax, and if you like it, we'll pay the tax and you build the statue or you build the school, whatever else. But this mineral belongs to us and our future generations. If you want to extract the mineral, you do it on these terms and you are not going to benefit really. So even those incentives change dramatically. Can this be implemented is the other question. Now, with this strategy, we can go to that 80% living in the cities who don't care about mining and saying, we're not saying stop mining, we all have cars and phones. We're going to have mining, but we're going to do it in a way that benefits us, benefits our children, and is just fair overall. That's one. Secondly, from an economic standpoint, all we're saying is, we as the people own the mineral, so we own the fund, we own the dividend. So it just follows any kind of property rights. So if the elite says, no, 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 we don't want to do that, say, okay, fine. You don't agree with the property rights of the commons, then we don't agree with the property rights of yours. So no economist can really argue with this. And which kind of a politician will implement something like this? Well, somebody like Mr. Rai, possibly somebody who is a Bernie Sanders or even a Trump, somebody who wants to go down in history. And the communication is quite simple. Let's stop all this crony capitalism and do it in this manner, and everybody wins. And the fear on my side really in propagating something like this is that these kind of people might become dictators for life. So to conclude, what have we achieved? This is all good in theory. In our Supreme Court case, on grounds of intergenerational equity, the Supreme Court of India ruled that for Goa iron ore, a permanent fund has to be set up with a new levy on iron ore, as well as a cap on extraction. Today, that fund exists with $70 million. Extraction actually has stopped, so there's no money accumulating. But the principle has been established. The fund exists. It's a global judicial precedent. Any of you can go anywhere in the world and argue this. The second thing we have done is we have used all of this. Now, you've heard about Chapter 9 in the Economic Survey, but there's also a Chapter 13 in the Economic Survey where Arvind Subramanian, who's done work on these ideas also in the past, has actually written about this idea in Chapter 13 and talked about this whole way of looking at it. But more importantly, earlier this year, the national government came out with the National Mineral Policy 2019. And one sentence is critical. It says this: natural resources, including minerals. So natural resources, the whole thing. Natural resources, including minerals, are a shared inheritance where the state is a trustee on behalf of the people to ensure that future generations receive the benefit of their inheritance. This is no longer Rahul Basu, Goa Foundation advocating this. This is the national government telling everybody in the country that natural resources are a shared inheritance where we have a responsibility to our future generations. So anybody in the country can now go to the government and say, we want this policy implemented. And anybody not in India can go to their governments and say, see, this is what the Indian government is doing. Let's do this. Our global platform is called The Future We Need. And Roberto, who's visited us in Goa, is wearing a T-shirt. And if you do visit us in Goa, you'll get a T-shirt. But please, we want campaigns all across the planet, because at a very deep level, if we consume our inheritance, at some point there will be no inheritance for our children and civilization will blow up. So the intergenerational equity is absolutely critical, and we need these kinds of advocacy all over the world. And at the end of the day, you also get a basic income. So there's great benefits for everybody. But if you think about it, the advocacy gets in human rights, gets in anti-corruption, gets in the environment movement, gets in, just the whole broad spectrum of civil society will combine to support such a thing. It's not just the basic, it's almost any civil society movement will want to support this. It should be doable. We strongly believe it can be done, and we strongly believe it can be done all over the world. So please join us in making real the future we need. Thank you.
And I, for one, think that the one in which we had thought that what Mr. Rahul Basu has talked about in so far as how, something as precious an inheritance as the minerals, you actually monetize that and then put it away, and monetize it in the best possible manner, and you put it away for future generations as well as for generations that are already in existence. And that is the kind of thinking that had gone. Sajidji and I worked on it for Sikkim, wherein the power generation that we do through hydro, all the money that comes from there, could we then not, why don't we, though it is renewable, why don't we start building a fund alongside? Also, fees that we could levy on tourists who come into Sikkim. And such like things which are there in terms of biodiversity, and in high altitude areas, our glaciers and water and so on and so forth. How can we start looking at the natural endowments, which are for the commons, and see how we can actually monetize it, build corpuses, and then look for a nice way of ensuring that they not only work for us, there is intergenerational equity as well.
Peter Knight from the Sufficiency for Sustainability Network. You discussed the commons in terms of natural resources, but you didn't discuss intellectual resources. As Andrew Yang, a candidate in the United States, says, the oil of the 21st century is technology. And technology is built upon the commons of intellectual development of mankind, not on natural resources so much. So I wonder to what extent, and given the high-tech part of the Indian economy, which is, this city and Bangalore and others, you're not thinking about that element of the commons as a source of resources for universal basic income.
This is Min again from Oroville. I'm very concerned with one of the presentations that was made earlier. This might be personal, I don't know how many of you would share that concern with me, is when...
Can you take louder?
When the example of Goa was given as a success story, I feel that when you are extracting resources which will cause enormous environmental damage, and then you are putting the capital into the capitalist system, you are perpetuating it. I am not sure this is addressing the intergenerational equity issue in a deeper way. I don't know how many of you share that, but I felt this maybe not be a great way to achieve that?
Hi, my name is Roberto. I teach philosophy in Portugal. Thanks a lot for all the talks. I have a question which is similar to the one just asked, but which goes in the opposite direction, because actually I sense a tension between, in fact, intergenerational equity and the need for that, and I see how important it is, and then the need to found a basic income for the actual generation. And so I wanted you, perhaps Raul and perhaps also Mr. Rai could explain to us how you can keep these two aims conciliatory. I mean, intergenerational equity and actual funding of a basic income for the people who need it now. Thank you.
Shall these four questions be answered? Then I'll again start. One question is perhaps Mr. Rahul Basu can answer, because two questions are on intergenerational equity and how.
Let me just first deal with, I'm not going to deal with the decolonization just now. Let me deal with the intellectual resources as a sort of intellectual property as a commons. This work has started from minerals, but it can be generalized into many directions. And I was 5 minutes over time, but I do have a second shot at it in a couple of days. But yeah, you know, there are many examples. There's a Sikkim example of hydropower. There's a separate, just another example in terms of natural resources, which people have not thought about, is all countries have spectrum fees for mobile telephony. And that is an absolutely renewable resource. There's no reason why spectrum fees cannot be distributed out as a basic income. But that's natural resources. In the longer process, any kind of commons, so you have intellectual commons, you would have things like land value tax, sort of the Georgist kind of an idea where the value of land is created by society. You can also go to government assets in many cases. When the government is privatizing assets, you can look at that and say that should also go into a permanent fund and go into this process. But it's really not a question of excluding anything. It's just a question of having enough time to explain. And the way we've done minerals, as far as we can see, nobody's done it or discussed it in this manner. There are analogies, but not quite. There's a separate question there on financialization of minerals, really. You know, when you take out minerals and convert it into cash, are you encouraging more and more extraction and conversion into cash, and then can you actually eat cash eventually? It is a definite concern. We come as an environmental NGO, not as a financial sort of basic income. Our political analysis is this: we cannot stop mining even in Goa despite the Western Ghats being there. We can ask for it. We actually did ask in the Supreme Court with very strong grounds. The point that keeps coming back is, like, even for this conference, a lot of us have flown, all of us have telephones, this has metal. There will be some amount of extraction. So if you remember how I explained intergenerational equity, we have two choices. One is we can keep the gold as is or the mineral as is, or we can convert it into financial capital. And if you note, our third principle always begins if we extract and sell our minerals. So if we do extract and sell our minerals, then this is the way to do it. But it is perfectly valid to leave the minerals in the ground. And the way to think about it is this: 30 generations of humanity before us have left the minerals in the ground, which is how we've got it. Most likely, species live about 30 million years. We've hardly gone anywhere. So let's say another million generations after us. So maybe it is better to leave the minerals in the ground, and maybe 10 generations after us, they come up with a better thing. But it's not something we can impose on the people. So we're saying that this is what you do if you do decide to extract it, but you have perfectly a good, valid reason not to extract it. And that also meets intergenerational equity.
Now, finally, in the area of, I think, intergenerational equity, and I think the issue which I think the gentleman here talked about is about what about we're talking about the future, but then what about the funding of the present? I think we'd like to think about the future, but we are also thinking about the funding. But if you look, I'll give you an example. In Sikkim, we used to have a lot of forest cover. We had a lot of timber. Today, timber has to be brought from outside the state because the present generation has been left with no timber because the generations before us exhausted all of that. And so I think we don't have a measure as to say what we are consuming today, is it enough? Is it something that is equitable? But when we say intergenerational equity, I think it just stems from the fact that if you don't even think about it, I don't think we're going to even find the answers. Thank you.
Hello, my name is Rajita. I'm a doctoral candidate at this university. Actually, I have a question for Rahul and then a comment. My question to Rahul is that the permanent funds, if you create a permanent fund, there's always this problem of over a period of time, would it able to sustain and give you a kind of stable return? And the kind of problem that Alaska is facing right now, when the revenue from the oil or any of those resources go down, then you have to make a choice between whether to invest money in public services or you should give people cash. So over a period of time when the coal runs out in Goa, wouldn't Goa face the same kind of problem? And how do you think we should deal with that, if you have any thoughts on that?
Hello, I'm Robert van der Veen, a political theorist from the University of Amsterdam. And I would like to address a theoretical question to Rahul Basu on the Goa 5 principles. And it seems to me that the connection between the first 4 and the 5th principle is not that automatic as it seems in your presentation. So what I think is a little bit of a problem, theoretically at least, maybe empirically there is an answer, is that the revenue after husbanding the intergenerational problem in a correct way, the revenue that then remains for the present, for funding the present as it was discussed, is not automatically to be dispensed in the form of a basic income. I mean, it may be desirable, but I don't see any theoretical reason in your system, which is intergenerational equity, balancing the interests of the future against those living in the present. I don't see any reason why that particular way of dispensing the revenue, even though it is equitable and egalitarian in a sense, should be unconditional in the 3 senses that we are talking about: individual, obligation-free, and no means testing, universal. So maybe you could explain something that tightens this connection. In that case, I would be far more convinced about your story, which I am very sympathetic to as from the outset. Thank you.
First, I'd like to thank Rahul for giving an legal application for our problems with Adani in Australia. Second, don't you think you can also apply your concept of intergenerational equity? Sounds very familiar to usufruct, the concept of usufruct, USUFRUCT, as mentioned by Thomas Jefferson at one time.
Yep.
And the third is, your plan sounds quite familiar. Have you ever studied Botswana by any chance? Because they managed to rise up from being the 2nd poorest country in the world in 1965 when they achieved independence to being the 2nd wealthiest country in Africa, overtaking South Africa. Thank you.
Yeah. The gentleman here, last question.
It's a very small question, but I was eager to ask it. It's to Rahul. You had this, you mentioned on this balancing thing of allowing the mining to happen and letting future generations and the state profit. You mentioned that there was a right to profit on the side of the miners, and you made this this form of a 100 cake, and you said the appropriate profit was 10, and I really wondered how you arrived at that 10. why the appropriate profit is 10, not 1, not 99. I guess the miners probably wish it was 99, some people wish it was 1, and I wondered if you had some kind of justification for that, which appears to be.
So questions to me. Let me go from the easy to the most difficult. There was a question on why was a profit of 10 sort of for the mining companies. And it's not 10 on 100, it's actually the sale price was 170. And the way in the financial world, and you can look at power sector utility pricing, they say that you get your full cost plus to the extent you've deployed capital in the business. You've created the power plant, there's working capital. The financial markets demand a return on that capital. And that is an understood thing. Now, when you go into the annual report of SESA Goa in this particular case, the thought is if we ask them to be a contractor, how would they bid? So they would ask for all the expenses, and then there's a certain capital amount to be deployed on which they need to get a return. So that return we calculated at 20%. The amount of capital was already in the annual report. So we used that, and it turns out to be 10 in this particular case. In deep offshore oil, it may be 50. It depends on case to case, but in this particular case, it's 10. But we can discuss it. I mean, we don't have time for a cross question on this, yeah? Coming to the, I just want to also deal with this question of why dividend, or I should say I'm not going to deal with it, but I'm not sure exactly what the disconnect is. We're basically saying this is a property right. We all own the mineral. It's like a cooperative or a mutual fund. I mean, you can have a distorted distribution, but the logical one is a property right. We all own it. We should equally, so we should just get the benefit equally. But let's have this conversation separately because I'm not sure exactly where you see the disconnect. Okay? But I'm here again in 2 days, so we can have the question again. On Alaska, Adani, Botswana, and USA, Botswana, I looked at all these examples, Alaska, Norway, Botswana, and many other places. Even a place like Norway actually has signs of the resource curse because they don't have all of these principles in place. They don't insist on zero loss, nor are they distributing a dividend. And the same thing with Botswana. Botswana is headed towards a resource curse issue. You just don't see it just now. But when you look at it a little bit longer, you're going to see that when the diamonds run out, there is going to be a problem. And one part of the problem is that many of you have talked about what we get from mining as revenue. It's not revenue because when you sell your asset, what you get is not revenue. And this is a framing issue which I'm going to discuss a little bit more a couple of days from now. But coming back to Alaska and the budget crisis they're having now, it's basically because only quarter, actually 18.3% of the money they get from the oil is going into the permanent fund. And the rest of the money is creating the budget volatility. And the correct approach would have been to put 100% into the fund and then there's no budget volatility. And when the mineral is exhausted, because they're not using any of the money from the mineral, in any case they're getting zero from it today. And then when the minerals is exhausted, they would still be just getting the income from the fund instead of, zero from the mineral.